In my family, success wasn't just expected, it was measured. Measured in bank balances, in job titles, in the kind of car parked outside the house. If you didn't have those things, you didn't matter. That was the rule. And I broke it. My older brother Daniel was everything my parents ever wanted. A corporate executive by 30, expensive suits, even more expensive habits. When he walked into a room, people noticed. My parents loved that. They loved the way his success reflected on them. My sister Alina wasn't far behind. She married into wealth, lived in a gated community, and spent her days posting pictures of a life that looked perfect from the outside. My mother adored her, said she had secured her future. And then, there was me. The mistake in the equation. The one who chose a different path. I became a teacher. Not because I couldn't do anything else. Not because I lacked ambition. But because, for the first time in my life, I found something that felt meaningful. I still remember my first day in the classroom. The nervous energy. The quiet chatter of students sizing me up. The moment I picked up the chalk and wrote my name on the board. I wasn't just standing there as a teacher. I was standing there as someone who could change lives. Even if it was just one student at a time. And that meant something to me. But to my family? It meant nothing. At first, the comments were subtle. "Oh, you're teaching," my mother would say, her smile tight, forced. "That's nice." Nice. That word followed me everywhere. Not impressive. Not successful. Just nice. At family gatherings, it got worse. My father would proudly introduce my brother. "This is Daniel, senior executive at one of the biggest firms in the city." People would nod, impressed. Then my sister. Alina married into the Khan family. You know them, right? More approval. And then, me. And this is, well, they teach. That pause. That hesitation. It said everything. I wasn't something to be proud of. I was something to explain. Or worse, something to downplay. I tried to ignore it. I told myself it didn't matter, that I didn't need their validation. But the truth, it hurt. More than I ever admitted. Because no matter how strong you pretend to be, when your own parents look at you like you're a disappointment, it leaves a mark. Still, I kept going. Every morning, I woke up before sunrise, prepared lessons, graded papers, and walked into that classroom with purpose. I saw students who reminded me of myself. Quiet ones, overlooked ones. The ones who didn't fit into neat categories of success. And I made sure they felt seen. I stayed after class for the student who struggled with reading. I spent weekends helping another prepare for exams. I celebrated small victories that no one else noticed. Because I knew what it felt like. To be invisible. And slowly, something started to happen. Students improved. Grades went up. Confidence grew. Parents started noticing. Then the school administration. I was offered more responsibility. Then recognition. Then awards within the school district. Small things. But meaningful. At least, to me. To my family? Still nothing. "You're working too hard for too little," my father said once. "If you had any real ambition, you'd do something bigger," my mother added. I wanted to argue. I wanted to explain. But I already knew. They weren't listening. They never were. The breaking point came on a night that was supposed to be just another family dinner. But something about the atmosphere felt different. tense. Like something had been building for a long time, and was finally about to break. The table was full, just like always. Food arranged perfectly. Conversations flowing around achievements, investments, travel plans. I sat there quietly, listening. Waiting for my turn. Not to impress. Just to be acknowledged. But when my turn came, it wasn't acknowledgement I got. It was judgment. My father leaned back in his chair, studying me like I was a problem he had been trying to solve for years. "You're still teaching?" he asked. I nodded. Yes. He let out a slow breath, shaking his head. "I don't understand you," he said. The room quieted slightly. My mother placed her fork down. "You had potential," she added. "Real potential." There it was again. Had. Like it was already gone. "I chose this," I said calmly. My voice didn't shake. But something inside me did. My brother smirked. "Yeah, we can see that." A few quiet laughs followed. I felt it. That familiar heat in my chest. But I stayed calm. Then my father said the words that changed everything. "You know what?" His tone hardened. "If this is the life you've chosen, then don't expect to be part of this family anymore." Silence. Complete silence. For a moment, I thought I misheard him. But then my mother spoke. And made it worse. "We didn't raise you to be this, ordinary," she said coldly. "If you want to live like that, then do it without us." Disowned. Not for betrayal. Not for wrongdoing. But for being a teacher. I looked around the table. At my brother. My sister. My family. No one said anything. No one defended me. Not a single word. And in that moment, something inside me finally broke. Not my confidence. Not my purpose. But my need for them. I realized something powerful. I had spent my entire life trying to prove my worth to people who had already decided I didn't have any. So why keep trying? Why keep fighting for approval that would never come? I slowly stood up. My chair scraped against the floor, louder than anything else in the room. All eyes were on me. Waiting. Expecting anger. Tears. A reaction. But I gave them none of that. "Okay," I said quietly. Just one word. But it carried everything. Acceptance. Closure. Freedom. They looked confused. Almost disappointed. As if they wanted me to beg. To prove they still had power over me. But I didn't. I picked up my bag. Walked toward the door. Step by step. No hesitation. No turning back. "Don't come back expecting anything," my father said behind me. I paused for a second. Not to respond. Just to let the moment settle. Then I walked out. That night. I lost my family. But I didn't lose myself. In fact, for the first time in my life, I finally found it. Standing alone outside, under the cold night sky, I took a deep breath. It hurt. Of course it hurt. But beneath that pain, there was something else. Something stronger. Clarity. Purpose. Resolve. I made a promise to myself right then and there. I wouldn't chase their approval anymore. I wouldn't shrink to fit their definition of success. I wouldn't let their words define my worth. Instead, I would build something so undeniable. That one day, they wouldn't just regret what they said. They would hear my name in a way they could never ignore. And months later, that moment finally came. The first few days after I left felt unreal. No calls, no messages, no comeback, just silence. At first, it stung, not because I expected them to apologize, but because a small part of me had hoped they would at least hesitate. That maybe, just maybe, I meant enough for them to question what they had done. But they didn't. And that silence became my answer. So I stopped waiting. Instead, I poured everything into the one place that had never rejected me, my classroom. Every morning, I walked in with a new mindset, not as someone trying to prove their worth, but as someone who already knew it. And that changed everything. My teaching shifted. I wasn't just following lesson plans anymore. I was creating experiences. I stayed longer after school. I redesigned the way I explained difficult topics. I found new ways to reach students who had already given up on themselves. There was one student, Ayan, who reminded me of myself. Quiet, always sitting in the back, always avoiding eye contact. His grades were slipping, and most teachers had already labeled him as unmotivated. But I saw something else. I saw someone who had stopped believing in himself, because no one else did. So I started working with him. Not just academically, but personally. I stayed after school with him, walked him through lessons slowly, encouraged him even when he didn't believe it himself. Weeks passed. Then months. And one day, something changed. He raised his hand in class. It was a small moment. But to him, it was everything. To me, it was proof. Proof that what I was doing mattered. That this wasn't a small life. This was impact. Word started spreading. Students from other classes began asking to sit in my lectures. Parents requested meetings, not to complain, but to thank me. The school administration noticed. At first, it was subtle. A few words of appreciation, a nod from the principal. Then came the first recognition. Teacher of the Month. It wasn't a big deal to most people. But to me, it was the first time someone had officially said, "You're doing something right." And it didn't stop there. I was given more responsibility. More classes. More challenging students. More trust. Instead of feeling overwhelmed, I felt alive. For the first time, I wasn't trying to fit into someone else's definition of success. I was creating my own. Months later, I was invited to a district-level teaching seminar. I almost didn't go. A part of me still carried those old voices. You're not good enough. You're just a teacher. But I went anyway. And that decision changed everything. The seminar was filled with experienced educators, people who had been in the field for years. People with awards, recognition, and reputations. I felt out of place at first. Until I started speaking. When I shared my methods, my experiences, my approach to students like Ayan, the room went quiet. Not out of judgment. Out of attention. For the first time in my life, people were actually listening to me. After the session, several educators approached me. They asked questions. They took notes. They thanked me. One of them, a senior official, looked at me and said something I'll never forget. "You're not just teaching students, you're changing the system." That sentence stayed with me. Because for so long, I had been told I was doing something small. But what I was building wasn't small at all. It was powerful. Soon after, I was nominated for a regional teaching award. I didn't tell anyone. Not my family. Not even close friends. Because this wasn't about proving something anymore. This was about purpose. Weeks later, I got the call. I had won. Regional recognition. An official award for excellence in teaching. I sat there holding the phone, silent. Not because I was surprised, but because for the first time, I felt seen. Truly seen. The ceremony was scheduled for a few weeks later. A large event, media coverage, government officials, including the governor. When I heard that, I paused. Something about it felt surreal. The same person my parents would proudly watch on TV would be standing in the same room as me, calling my name for something they once disowned me for. I didn't know how to feel. Part of me felt proud. Part of me felt calm. And a small part of me felt something else. Not revenge. Not anger. But closure. The day of the ceremony arrived. I stood backstage, holding the invitation in my hand. My name printed clearly. Official. Recognized. Real. I thought about everything that led me here. The nights I doubted myself. The words that tried to break me. The moment I walked out of that house and chose myself. I took a deep breath. Because in a few minutes, I wouldn't just be a lowly teacher. I would be someone whose name was about to echo in a room full of people who valued what I did. And somewhere out there, there was a chance my family might hear it too. The lights were brighter than I expected. Not harsh, but overwhelming in a different way. The kind of brightness that doesn't just illuminate a stage. It exposes everything. I stood backstage, holding the edge of the curtain lightly between my fingers, just enough to see the audience without being seen. Rows of people. Educators, officials, families, media. And right at the center, the stage. Where everything was about to change. My name was printed on the program in bold letters. Clear, undeniable. Real. For a moment, I just stood there, breathing. In. Out. Trying to steady the storm inside me. Because this wasn't just another event. This wasn't just another award. This was the moment. The moment every late night, every doubt, every silent tear had been leading to. The moment where everything I had built, quietly, patiently, without validation, would finally be seen. A voice broke through my thoughts. You're up in 5. I nodded. My hands weren't shaking. That surprised me. Months ago, years ago, they would have been. Back then, I would have been thinking about what my parents would say. Would they be proud? Would they finally approve? But now? That thought didn't even cross my mind. Because somewhere along the way, I had stopped needing it. The announcer stepped onto the stage. Applause filled the room. Formal introductions began. Names, titles, achievements, one after another. I listened, but not really. Because my mind drifted. Back to that night. The dinner table. The silence. My father's voice. If this is the life you've chosen, don't expect to be part of this family anymore. My mother's words. We didn't raise you to be this ordinary. And then the quiet. The kind of quiet that follows something irreversible. I closed my eyes for a second. That version of me, the one sitting at that table, no. Next, the announcer said, we honor an individual whose work has gone beyond teaching, Someone who has transformed lives, reshaped classrooms, and redefined what it means to educate. A pause. Kind that builds anticipation. My heart slowed. Not faster. Slower. Clearer. An educator whose impact has been felt not just by students, but by an entire community. I stepped closer to the stage entrance. The curtain brushed against my shoulder. And now, to present this award, please welcome our governor. The room erupted into applause. I watched as the governor walked onto the stage, confident, composed, respected. For a brief moment, I thought about my parents. How they would have reacted to this. How proud they would have been. If it had been my brother. But it wasn't. And that changed everything. The applause faded. The governor adjusted the microphone. And then he said my name. Clear. Loud. Unmistakable. For a split second, everything stopped. The noise. The movement. The world. It was just that moment. My name, echoing through a room full of people who mattered. People who understood. People who valued what I had done. I stepped onto the stage. Each step felt steady. Grounded. Real. The lights hit my face, but this time, I didn't feel exposed. I felt seen. The governor extended his hand. Congratulations, he said. I shook it. Thank you. A simple exchange. But it carried years of meaning. He handed me the award. Heavy. Not just in weight, but in everything it represented. Recognition. Validation. Truth. The applause started again. Louder this time. Stronger. And for a moment, I just stood there, taking it in. Because this wasn't something anyone had given me out of pity. This wasn't something I inherited. I earned this. Every piece of it. The governor stepped aside slightly. Would you like to say a few words? I nodded. Walked to the microphone. Looked out at the crowd. Hundreds of faces. Waiting. Listening. Respecting. I took a breath. And began. I was once told. My voice didn't shake. That what I do isn't enough. The room grew quiet. That being a teacher means choosing a small life. A pause. I let the words settle. But today, I lifted the award slightly. I stand here not because I chose something small, but because I chose something meaningful. Applause! Soft at first, then growing. I continued. I've seen students who were told they weren't smart become confident. I've seen those who were ignored find their voice. And I've learned something important along the way. I paused. Looked around the room. Impact isn't measured by money, or titles, or status. It's measured by the lives you change. The applause grew louder. Stronger. And in that moment, I felt something I had never felt before. Not pride. Not relief. Something deeper. Peace. Because I finally understood. I had nothing left to prove. Not to them. Not to anyone. After the speech, the ceremony continued. Photos, conversations, congratulations. People approached me, shaking my hand, thanking me, calling me an inspiration. Each word felt genuine, real. And then, something unexpected happened. As I stepped away from the stage area, I saw them. At the back of the hall, my parents, standing still, silent, watching me. For a second, time rewound. Back to that dinner table. Back to those words. But this time, everything was different. They weren't looking at me with disappointment or judgment. They were looking at me with something else. Something unfamiliar. Regret. My mother took a step forward, then stopped, as if unsure whether she had the right to come closer. My father's posture wasn't the same. The confidence, the authority, gone. Replaced by hesitation. I walked toward them slowly. Not out of obligation. Not out of anger. But because I was no longer afraid of this moment. We stood face to face. No words at first. Just silence. But this silence was different. It wasn't heavy. It wasn't suffocating. It was honest. My mother spoke first. "We saw you," she said quietly. I nodded. "I know." My father looked at the award in my hand, then at me. His voice was lower than I had ever heard it. "You've done well." A simple sentence. But it carried everything they had refused to say for years. I looked at them. Really looked at them. And realized something. I didn't need this anymore. Not their approval. Not their validation. Not even their apology. Because I had already given myself everything they once denied me. Respect. Worth. Belief. "I didn't do this for you," I said calmly. They both went silent. "I did this because I believed in what I do." Another pause. "And I still do." My mother's eyes filled slightly. My father looked away. For the first time, they had nothing to argue with. Nothing to control. Nothing to take away. Because everything I was mine. I gave a small nod. Not forgiveness. Not rejection. Just acknowledgement. Then I turned and walked away. Not out of anger, but because the story between us had already ended. Outside, the night air felt different. Calmer. Lighter. The world stretched out in front of me. Open. Full of possibilities. And as I stood there, holding that award, I realized something. They had disowned me. For being just a teacher. But in the end, that lowly path took me further than they could have ever imagined. And the name they once dismissed had finally become impossible to ignore.